country of New Zealand has done a lot of really interesting studies looking at inmates that are incarcerated for felonies, murders, aggravated assault. They generally have a lower omega-3 index compared to inmates who are in there for like drug distribution or petty crimes. There's a strong independent association between higher participation in violent crime and a low omega-3 index.
Interesting.
The foods that you're eating are affecting the composition of your brain and your brain chemistry.
What are your thoughts on cold therapy?
Super controversial. Some people are of the belief that, well, women should just do Pilates and what feels good in yoga. While I'm all for that, that is not sufficient to improve your body composition.
How often should we be thinking about exploring detoxification?
That was a really bad idea in the early 2000s. All the jackets like North Face and Arc'teryx that everyone was wearing, turns out that the water repellent in that is really bad stuff.
Wow.
Love like the sun. You can love on someone, but if they're not able to receive that, then that's their thing. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to love them.
Hi guys, welcome to Permission. This one is for the woman who's doing everything right and still not seeing results. Training hard, eating clean, showing up every single day, and her body isn't meeting her halfway. Mike Mutzel is the founder of High Intensity Health and one of the sharpest minds in metabolic science. And he told me something that truly landed. Sometimes pushing more is the very thing that's breaking you down. We get into metabolic debt, why a woman's cycle should be dictating her training, and the quiet damage that microplastics and forever chemicals are doing to your hormones. The answer isn't more discipline. It might be more understanding.
Mike Mutzel, thank you so much for being here today. So grateful.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I was really looking forward to talking to you about exercise.
Okay.
So we have a lot of knowledge about the benefits of exercise, right? But what about the frequency? What about the type of exercise? At what time of the day? Can you speak a little bit about that for women specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the tricky answer here is it's very individual for the person. And I think especially when it comes to women, based upon are they still cycling or peri or postmenopausal? As you likely know, and many women listening, during the luteal phase, estrogen is going to be lower, higher progesterone, and resiliency may not be there. So really intense HIIT training, CrossFit style training may not be the best. So like give your body some grace and scale back a little bit. Whereas in contrast, during the follicular phase in the cycle, higher testosterone, higher estrogen can handle more loads, more volume, more intensity. So I think that's important for folks to consider, number one. Number two, I think it really depends on one's constitution. I've had several clients over the years who they just have a really high ability to take on a lot of volume and a lot of intensity. So I think that's something to consider. Whereas some people, they might just do 2 or 3 workouts a week and one of them might be really intense and that's sufficient for them. So I think that's really important to consider. Also, where they are metabolically speaking, do they have, I like to look at metabolic debt the same way we look at financial debt, right? So if you have been reckless with your spending, you have 3 or 4 credit cards that are maxed out, you can't really afford to go to Mexico City, just have fun, right? Like you need to be a little bit more conscious with your spending. And the same thing I think can hold with, we think about metabolic debt. If someone has a body fat percentage over 30%, if they have insulin resistance, which we can characterize by high fasting triglycerides, high fasting insulin and glucose, and elevated hemoglobin A1C levels, if we have metabolic debt, that individual needs to be a little bit more consistent with their exercise. Maybe not increase the volume and intensity so much that they dig themselves into a hole from a adrenal standpoint, but it's very individual. And so I think it is important too for people to try different modalities to see what works. I think, we hear about High Rocks and CrossFit and people get really excited about that. And they come from no athletic background and jump into something really intense and a lot of volume. And they may not be able to accommodate those loads. If you've been exercising for a long period of time, you can accommodate more volume in a given exercise session and throughout the week. So that's important for folks to understand. Also, as you know, as we get older, we lose the 2 critically important hormones that affect recovery, growth hormone and DHEA, tend to go down in our 30s. And so we can't accommodate as much volume and recover from that as we get into our 40s and 50s, unless, of course, and I'm biased because I supplement with DHEA, and I think this is really important even for women before menopause, but especially after menopause. DHEA is a hormone that's made by our adrenal glands, and it's a precursor to both testosterone and estrogen. And it's really important for women postmenopausally and perimenopausally to optimize DHEA, because once the ovaries stop releasing all of the different, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, all the onus is on the adrenals to make those hormones. And so I have found a lot of women suffer from sexual dysfunction, vaginal dryness, low libido, low muscle mass, and so forth postmenopausally, and DHEA is a great thing to consider. So the way we look at that, dosing that is about 10 milligrams of DHEA per decade of life for men. So like I'm 40, so I take 40 milligrams of DHEA in the evening time. We'll get to women momentarily, but I think it's important now to mention this. Cortisol is the only hormone that doesn't decrease with age. Every other hormone does. Estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, growth hormone. Cortisol only goes up as we get older, which kind of sucks because as you probably know, and many people do know listening, cortisol can affect our sleep quality and sleep duration. And so I like to recommend people dose DHEA in the evening time because DHEA can help antagonize cortisol. So it can help foster more deep restorative sleep. And then also there's immunologic benefits to DHEA. So for women for dosing, it's about 75% less, or 0.25 milligrams per decade of life. So a 40-year-old woman would start at 10 milligrams of DHEA. Whereas for men, it'd be 40 milligrams of DHEA in their 40s. Mm-hmm. So much lower dosages, especially if women haven't yet hit menopause. But women who have low testosterone, low libido, and have been kind of burning the candle at both ends with work and maybe a new child and sleep issues, DHEA can be very helpful for that. So getting back to the recovery, I think all of that is really important when we're sort of prescribing an exercise protocol for someone. And I think just looking at other vital signs for women, like, okay, you're doing this exercise plan, but how is it impacting your cycle? Are you consistent with a 28-day cycle, or some months is it 26, other days other months it's 35 days, right? So if there's a lot of variability in one cycle, obviously that can be hormone issues, but that can be induced by overexercise. So I think for women, in contrast to men, they have a lot more feedback about the life load and the volume when it comes to exercise. And speaking of life load, that's really important to consider, right? If you're working on a deadline, you're a wedding planner or something and spring is coming up and a lot of people are getting married, really, really busy, probably not a good time to do a high rocks, training session or CrossFit, like scale back a little bit. And you could do more zone 2 training. You could still do, I think resistance training in general is great 3 to 4 days a week for pretty much everyone. But where people, in my estimation, get into issues with overtraining is when they do too much high intensity interval training, too much volume, too many sets, reps, prolonged, sprint interval sessions. And that can be pretty hard on the body. When we think about just the physiologic state, when you're doing a 30-second all-out sprint and I like CrossFit periodically. When some CrossFit workouts are just super intense, and you need time to recover from that. So again, getting back to practical tools, how can we measure this? There's a new blood pressure cuff that I really like, and I have no financial ties with this. It's called Connect with a Q. So CONNEEQT. Connect. And what's cool is that you use it first thing in the morning, and it looks at your augmentation index, which is the blood pressure leading up to your brain in the carotid arteries. It looks at your systemic blood pressure, but it also looks at your heart rate. So your first morning heart rate can give you a good indication about your recovery. Interesting. And so if you start to notice either a dip, a sudden drop in your heart rate, or your resting heart rate is elevated, that would be a good indicator that you're burning the candle at both ends. You're over-exercising or under-recovering. So that's the other thing to consider. Like if someone is going to exercise very intensely and they're like, look, I just want to get jacked for summer or whatever. If you have 10 hours a night to sleep and you can get all your meals in, then that's fine. But if you're, getting 6 hours of sleep, you're breastfeeding, like you have a little newborn, then we're going to have to scale back on the intensity. So I generally, just to put a bow on that, most of the randomized, trials and interventional studies when it comes to exercise prescription recommend about 4 sets per major muscle groups per week. So you can spread that fatigue out over different different workouts. But as long as you're getting at least 4 sets, say 4 sets of squats, 4 sets of bench press, 4 sets of presses, 4 sets of pull-ups, then you're going to provide sufficient stimulation to the muscle to help to maintain and preserve muscle mass throughout lifespan. Because that's really what we're trying to do here, is make sure that as we get older, we don't lose muscle, which naturally happens. And for women, this is really important because there's a connection between loss of muscle and loss of bone. And then also it's a triad. It's called osteosarcopenic obesity. So you start to lose muscle mass. That's the sarcopenic part of that word. You start to lose bone, and then you start to gain more body fat. And these are all things we do not want. And we see this in frail adults, right? Where they have too much body fat, their bones are not strong enough, and they don't have enough muscle. And so Grandma Sue will turn, and she doesn't have the agility or the strength to prevent her from falling, and then she fractures her hip, and then she dies a year later, sadly, right? That happens all too often.
Yes.
So really important, but also we can overdo it. And then I think, so that's on it's like a spectrum, right? When it comes to exercise. And then some people are of the belief that, well, women should just do Pilates and what feels good in yoga. And while I'm all for that, right? Do the exercises that you like, that is not sufficient to improve your body composition for most people, unless your diet is really dialed in. So it's hard to get a physique that is going to be optimally healthy as you get older by just doing some of those really easy body weight style exercises like Pilates or yoga here and there. We still have to provide that stimulation by way of resistance training, 4 sets per major muscle group per week, to help to optimize our body composition throughout lifespan.
Right, interesting. When we're thinking about the types of exercise, can we also talk about a genetic component to this? Is there are there different genes that might influence on what's optimal for a specific person?
Beautiful question. I don't know that data myself. I know there are some companies, I've seen them, doctors I've worked with over the past several years will run a genetic analysis on people and say, hey, you're more of an endurance athlete, or your muscle fiber types are, more fast twitch.
I'm just wondering what could that be? Yeah.
I think that's important, but I think the most important thing is like focus on the exercises that you like to do. Like if you love to run and like you feel so good after running, okay, great, but you still should do resistance training as well.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on cold therapy?
Super controversial. For some reason, I'm a huge fan. I've personally been doing it since 2014. What I love about it is it's a really good mental exercise, because it takes a lot of mental grit to just get in a cold plunge or a cold river or lake. And it's a hormetic or adaptive stressor. And I think this is really important because I'm not going to mention any names, but there's a female, I don't know if she's a nutritionist or a doctor, but she's been on a lot of podcasts, has written a book, and has really discouraged women from doing cold immersion therapy because she says, well, it's really bad for your hormones. It does all these negative things. And that has caused women to be fearful of this potentially very therapeutic and stress-reducing modality or intervention we have access to. What I like to bring up is the story of the Alma pearl divers. Have you heard of these?
No, I haven't.
It's fascinating. So these women, it's a tribe outside of Japan, I believe, ALMA, and people can Google image this. It's amazing. These women would dive in their bikinis and whatever all year round and it was like a novelty, like men would go on the boats outside of somewhere in Japan and watch these women dive down, free dive, and extract pearls and different things and fish and find gems in the ocean and bring them up. They're like real life mermaids, right? And of course we know that like the ocean water outside of Japan is really cold. It turns out that these women smoke at a much higher prevalence compared to other parts of Japan, and they don't eat as healthily compared to other parts of Japan, yet their traditional cardiovascular biomarkers like LDL cholesterol and HDL cholesterol and their elasticity of their blood vessels and the degree of coronary artery calcification is like orders of magnitude lower compared to age-matched controls that don't free water swim. And you might wonder, well, why is that? Is it just because they're swimming or they're exercising? Well, that's part of it, but they're very adapted to the benefits. Their body has just adapted to getting cold on purpose. And here's the magic in that is when you get cold on purpose, blood flow is distributed away from the periphery, like our fingers and our toes, back to the core. And as you get warmer, blood then returns. And that process causes an increased elasticity within your vessels, which is really important for reducing blood pressure and risk of all-cause mortality and risk of cardiovascular specific mortality. So there's a lot of benefits to this sort of massaging of your blood as well as your lymphatic system as well. So we talk a lot about the cardiovascular system, but we can't talk about heart disease without talking about our lymphatic system because it's intimately connected. In fact, if we think about where do we measure, like when you get a blood draw, it's in your venous system, but like heart disease happens in the arterial system. Like, well, how do your lipids that supposedly cause cardiovascular disease get to your veins? It's by way of the lymphatic system. So we see a lot of lymphatic dysfunction in people with obesity, with diabetes, with high blood pressure. So in my opinion, lymph stagnation is really important when it comes to preventing all sorts of conditions, autoimmunity, asthma, allergies, and cardiovascular disease. And one of the best ways to improve lymphatic flow and function is, number one, what we've been talking about, exercise. And in my opinion, number two is cold immersion therapy, as well as sauna. So we're just improving the flow of both our blood and our lymph. And a lot of people just have stagnant blood flow and stagnant lymph. And that's why we see peripheral artery disease really rampant and common, and people are having blood clots that lead to strokes and things like that. So all that being said, that's why I think cold immersion therapy is a wonderful tool. Can people overdo it? Of course. Should women do it every single day, no matter where they are in their cycle? Probably not. Again, during luteal phase, when things are a little off and tired, maybe you shouldn't do as many cold showers or cold plunges. But to say that women shouldn't do this at all because it raises cortisol is bad. And here's why I say that, Shadia. Like when you get up in the morning, that raises cortisol. When you have dinner tonight, that too raises cortisol. So if we want to start vilifying cortisol as always this bad thing that you need to keep in check, then we should tell people never to eat. You shouldn't wake up in the morning, just lie in bed. And of course that would be stupid, right? We want to, when we think about cortisol and the elevations of cortisol, it needs to be discussed in context. It's not just this binary black or white thing. What we want to avoid in the context of stress in general and cortisol specifically is a chronic elevation in cortisol. So we know that exercise is beneficial, right? People that exercise have lower risk of all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality. But exercising, guess what, raises cortisol, right? So cold plunges, yes, they raise cortisol. So does eating, and so does exercise, getting up in the morning. So we want to think about this contextually, and if one is worried about their stress response and adrenal glands, probably the best time to do a cold immersion therapy or a cold shower would be in the morning. And so we can benefit from that increased cortisol awakening response. You should have a very robust cortisol release from your adrenal glands in the morning. You wouldn't want to do this before bed because that can compromise sleep quality and sleep duration.
So what happens with women that struggle with autoimmune issues? Is cold therapy recommended?
This, again, is controversial, but in my opinion, I think it would be indicated for sure. If we think about autoimmune disease, like just generally, what is this? This is your immune system is confusing your own tissue. Your immune system should be defending your body against foreign antigens, viruses, parasites, bacteria, and so forth. But when your immune system gets confused and thinks your thyroid is a foreign substance and starts to make antibodies against it, that's a problem. And when we think about the immune system, part of it could be related to lymphatic stagnation, like we talked about. But also a big reason why people, I think it's not talked about enough, that underlying metabolic dysfunction often precedes autoimmune disease. And so if you think about whether it's Hashimoto's, you think about lupus, scleroderma, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, all these autoimmune conditions, elevated levels of leptin is implicated in most of these different conditions. And leptin is derived from our fat tissue. Right? A lot of people think about leptin in obesity and how leptin resistance drives hypothalamic leptin resistance. And basically that causes people, even though they have enough energy on board in the form of excess body fat, their brain is telling them that they don't have enough. They need to eat, they need to consume energy because this resistance going on within the brain. And that's why you often see people, overweight children, become obese adults and then morbidly obese adults because of this. But I bring this up because leptin is also involved in the immune system. And I wrote about it in my book in 2014. Leptin kind of downregulates a really important cell within our immune system that prevents autoimmune disease. It's known as the T regulatory cells. So just simple analogy, if you think about your immune system with like good guys and bad guys, cops and robbers, right? The actors within the immunologic system that could be contributing to autoimmunity would be like the robbers, and the policemen would be telling the robbers, hey, don't attack the thyroid, don't attack the joints in the case of multiple sclerosis or the central nervous system. The T regulatory cells are the policemen. And so if you have metabolic dysfunction, increased body fat, you underexercise, the T regulatory cells are not there to prevent the immune system from attacking the thyroid. So by losing body fat, by becoming more metabolically healthy in the context of going in a cold shower or cold plunge, because again, the benefits of that are increased beiging of your adipose tissue. So anyone who's picked up a newborn child knows that the newborn kids have a lot of brown fat in their clavicle region, trapezoid region. And that brown fat is very metabolically active. It's enriched in mitochondria. That's why it's brown, right? Usually you see mitochondria in your muscle and in your brain and in your heart. And by getting your body more acclimated to cold, you increase the amount of mitochondria that are in your fat cells. And that makes them more metabolically healthy and also decreases inflammation. I mean, if we think about, if you go play soccer tonight and you roll your ankle, what is a doctor going to say? Ice, right? You want cold.
Right.
And so because cold has been used for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years as a tool to decrease inflammation. And so that's what we're really doing when we want to go in an ice bath. It's like we want to reduce inflammation systemically, not just localized. And there's a lot of benefit to that, in my opinion. So we talked about autoimmunity. Yeah. And so with the context of autoimmunity, in case we move on from this, things like vitamin D, really important. Omega-3 fats, EPA and DHA, really important for decreasing inflammation, but also increasing the activity of this T regulatory cell. That's really, really important. Things like fermented foods, kefir, yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, all the fermented foods are good for the immune system. And of course, the microbiome as well. Vitamin A is also helpful, turmeric. So these are things that folks can consider with regards to autoimmune disease, which I will mention, I am seeing, my practice isn't huge, but I see a lot more autoimmune thyroid now than I ever have before. And I'm not sure if that was from people getting COVID or a side effect of the immunization. I have one client that I've been working with, and he sees a lot of really high-end longevity doctors in New York City and LA. After he received his thing for the virus, his autoimmune thyroid, he always had low levels of anti-TPO antibodies, and they quadrupled and haven't come down. And I think he got Pfizer because he's in Israel. So just something to consider. And folks, again, this is not a pro or anti conversation with regards to that, but just I would recommend people test their antibodies because for some reason they seem to be increasing, I've noticed.
What are your thoughts on peptides for autoimmune?
Great question. For autoimmune disease specifically, I don't know the answer to that. There's people out there that are way more versed in peptides, but I think they're amazing. It's an amazing new intervention that we have access to. And personally, in January, I just started dabbling with the CJC Epimorelin stack at night. I think it's amazing. Like your dream recall recovery is like so much better. I'm disappointed that I didn't know about this a couple of years ago. So I think peptides are amazing, and I'm sure there's very immunologic specific peptides that I'm unaware of, but I would encourage people to work with someone who knows what they're doing in that realm.
Absolutely. I normally take BPC 157, and I've found that I don't know what it is, but it just feels like I'm calm, right? And my sleep just improves drastically. So it's really, really powerful. Let's talk a little bit about toxins and detoxification. How often should we be thinking about exploring detoxification? What's an ideal journey for women?
I think every day. I mean, not getting colonics or enemas every day, but we're constantly exposed to these things. I mean, literally the furniture that we're sitting on right now probably has flame retardants that have reproductive harm. Our clothing is all bathed in all sorts of yucky stuff. So I think it's really important to first minimize our exposure, right? Because it's now ubiquitous. I mean, you can't go anywhere without having plastic in, whether it's even supplements, right? We talk about supplements all the time. They're all made in plastic bags. I've been working in that field for a long time. So it's in our food, it's in our air, it's in our water, cosmetics, everything. So I think it's something we should always be considering. And one of the best ways to detoxify is to make sure you're having a good bowel movement and sweating every single day. And again, this is going back to exercise, why I love exercise. One of the best things you can do for detoxification is to exercise intensely so that you sweat. Because in your sweat, there's actually a physician, Stephen Jenis, out of Alberta, Canada. He's conducted some studies called the BUS studies, blood, urine, sweat, where he's looked and enumerated or quantified what is coming out of our sweat. And it's all the heavy metals, arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury. And I think we don't know enough about their persistent organic pollutants, or the so-called EDCs, the endocrine disrupting chemicals. Their perfluoro compounds we know are really problematic, the so-called forever chemicals in Teflon and Gore-Tex waterproof layering. That was a really bad idea in the early 2000s. Like all the jackets like North Face and Arc'teryx that everyone was wearing, turns out that the water repellent in that is really bad stuff from a detox standpoint. So it's something we always should be considering. And Russ Jaffe taught me this many years ago. We want to think about sulfur-containing foods. Like people have heard about N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, and Baylor University has done some amazing studies that we can talk about momentarily. But we want to think about having more sulfur in our diet. So garlic, onions, turmeric, eggs, and meat, turns out, are foods that are naturally enriched in sulfur. And so again, we should all be thinking about this all the time. So those are foods that I recommend people consume pretty much all the time, staples in their diet. It's easy to cook with garlic. Just add garlic, salt, and butter, and anything will taste better, you know? So that's something to consider. And then in terms of supplements, specifically I'm biased because I have a supplement company, but N-acetylcysteine and glycine combination, high dose, at least 1,500 milligrams in the evening time, is just something I do every day, and I recommend that for people. And again, Baylor University investigators there has conducted pretty good human clinical trials showing that when people take high dose NAC and high dose glycine, these are two amino acids that have a long dossier of safety, even in mainstream medicine. You know, unfortunately, like I knew of someone in my middle school who tried to kill themselves with Tylenol, acetaminophen. It's really hepatotoxic or damaging to the liver. And if someone were to ingest too much Tylenol or drink with Tylenol and they go to the hospital because they're having acute liver failure, guess what they give them? NAC. And so this has been used in ERs for at least 50 years, N-acetylcysteine. And so we can take this as a supplement over the counter in higher dosages. Again, some supplements have 400 milligrams. That's like pixie dust. It's not going to do anything. You want at least 1,500 milligrams. And the reason why you want to pair that with glycine is because we're trying to increase our body's most abundant and effective intracellular antioxidant and phase 2 detoxification molecule known as glutathione. Really important for all aspects of detoxification. And glutathione is made up of 3 amino acids, glutamine, glycine, and cysteine. The rate-limiting amino acids are glycine and cysteine. So that's why we take the two together. So yeah, we should be thinking about this all the time. This is why people should get sauna blankets if they don't have access to a sauna, go for a run, get hot. And again, making sure that they're eating a diet or taking magnesium at night so that they have a good bowel movement in the morning. And then filtered water, obviously, that's something. And then never, like, I don't know, I haven't drinking out of a plastic water bottle in like 10 years. You know, like some people offer it. I'm like, I'd rather drink the tap water, you know, because researchers at UCLA have enumerated how much microplastics are in a plastic water bottle. That really thin plastic, that's what you want to watch out for. Thankfully, the supplement bottles are what's known as HDPE. It's a high density polyethylene. So that is less likely to sort of off-gas the microplastics into your supplements. But food containers, you never want to throw like pre-cooked rotisserie chicken in the microwave. All that thin plastic, once it gets hot, it's no good. I travel with a stainless steel coffee mug, so if you go out and get coffee, just bring your mug or request a ceramic mug for here. Coffee cups, and pretty much, it's sad, but all so quote unquote paper food products, you know, like the containers and things like that, even at Whole Foods, they have this thin little microplastic lining to prevent the moisture in the coffee or the food to penetrate the cardboard. So try to eat as much as you can at home. even things like gluten-free chips or paleo chips or whatever in the bag, all those things have microplastic, you know? And so we really need to get back to just consuming whole real food, you know, snack on an avocado, not chips, you know, or make your own chips. You can get corn tortillas, cut them up and fry them in ghee or butter, and then you can have your own corn chips and dip them in your own guac. You know, there's a lot of really simple things you can do and just learn these habits.
Absolutely. Speaking about nutrition and connecting that to the gut microbiome, I'd love to hear your thoughts on mental health. What is happening in the gut microbiome of somebody that struggles with depression, anxiety, or any kind of mental health issue?
Yeah, huge point. There's a lot going on. And if we think about it, you know, when we feel sick, we feel depressed, you know, and that's what causes us to lie around in bed and things like that. So all the so-called cytokines or interleukins, the so-called communication molecules of the immune system, they directly affect the brain, you know, and so they make you feel ill. And so there's a huge connection there. And that's why we see people that consume ultra-processed foods, go out and have fast food, they tend to have higher scores of depression, anxiety, things like that. So there's a strong connection there. Even if you look at violence, for example, New Zealand, the country of New Zealand has done a lot of really interesting studies looking at markers of ultra-processed food consumption, and also they look at red blood cell EPA and DHA, which are a way to approximate the amount of healthy omega-3 fats that one has consumed in their diet. There's a strong independent association between higher participation in violent crime and a low omega-3 index.
Interesting.
It's wild, because literally, like, the foods that you're eating are affecting the composition of your brain and your brain chemistry. And so inmates that are incarcerated for felonies, murders, murder attempts, aggravated assault, they generally have a lower omega-3 index compared to inmates who are in there for like drug distribution or, you know, petty crimes and so on. So what would be even more fascinating, Shadia, is to look at these school shootings and to look at the diets, you know, of these individuals that are participating in these horrific crimes that are like, why would someone do something so terrible? I can't help but wonder that, you know, it's a lifetime of ultra-processed food that has impacted the brain. And I know you and I, we haven't talked a lot about our past, but like in college, I used to eat processed food and Taco Bell and Taco Time. I was in a fraternity and party, and like my brain and my thinking and my, you know, reactivity to things like traffic or something stupid was totally different compared to how I am now. And I can't help but think that, gosh, my diet back then was just contributing to, whether it's microbiome changes that affects the immune system or the hormones, all of that. But it plays a really important part in this. And so there's other things that we can talk about, like carnonutrients, like creatine, for example. There's been a lot of really interesting studies about creatine and how creatine supplementation. There was a group, I think it was Queen's College in London, that looked at people who were that had anxiety and depression, and they were receiving cognitive behavioral therapy treatment. And they randomized them to receive the CBT, which is just like talk therapy basically, or CBT with creatine. And the individuals who had poor mental health scores that took the creatine with the CBT had much better outcomes when it came to mental health. And you might say, well, how does creatine tie in this conversation? Well, you're getting creatine usually from a healthy omnivorous style diet, right? If you're having Taco Bell, or if you're having just fried chicken at Chick-fil-A, you're not getting much creatine, or you're not getting much omega-3s. In contrast, if you have a ribeye steak, you're getting over 5 grams of creatine, right? So all these micronutrients that are found in a healthy whole diet are not only good for the microbiome, but they're also good for the brain as well. And so it's impossible to disentangle, and I think people should really take note of this. And I've just seen in my clients over the years, you know, there's a correlation with mood and affect and, overall cognitive resilience, you know, and just like the ability to take on and manage stressful situations. People who lack that emotional or cognitive resilience, you know, generally they have GI issues and other related things. So I think it's all connected. I don't know how we enumerate this. I don't know how we measure this. Great questions, but something we should be focusing on for sure.
Mm-hmm. What part of these mental health issues could be connected more to trauma or childhood abuse? And what are some ways in which we could explore in that direction?
This is a great question. I'm not an expert in this area, although I have interacted with people throughout my life who have unresolved traumas. And that definitely shows up in communication, especially within significant relationships. And so you see that people who haven't done the inner work, childhood trauma, or addressed some of that, that definitely shows up in how they present and how they react. And again, I'm not a psychologist, but one of the things that I found is people who haven't dealt with their trauma and done some of this inner work, they tend to be very defensive and hypercritical to any criticism, and can really shut down emotionally if there is perceived criticism of their behaviors, and they can't really take ownership and realize, like, you know what, that was a crappy thing that I did. I'm sorry. It's like, well, you did this, or like, remember on December 31st in 2011, like you stole my cookies, and like bring up all this unrelated stuff. It's like, instead of just owning it and be like, yeah, I screwed up, And so I think all of that it's impossible to disentangle from this conversation of nutrition, because again, when we think about the brain, the prefrontal cortex and executive function and the ability to sort of look at oneself from a meta perspective and look at their own behaviors, it's all interconnected. And even people who have trauma-related issues, their amygdala can be hyperactivated, right? And so they can feel that any perceived criticism is perceived as something that is they can have an over-exaggerated amygdala-based response that can cause their behavior to shift in a different way. So yeah, I would like to see medicine really more address some of that. Because if we look at, well, why do people overeat? Why don't they exercise? Like, these are all things that we know to be healthy for us. A lot of that is related to traumas and self-medicating in the wrong way, whether it's with alcohol or substances or porn or whatever the thing is. So I do think we're now hearing so much more about this, and I don't know where people go for this, other than, to be honest, how I got a little bit more into this was dabbling with psychedelics, because when you start to, whether it's mushrooms or LSD or, MDMA paired with psilocybin or ayahuasca, that we can dive into, that's really those uncomfortable feelings that you might feel when you take psychedelics actually cause you to look at your own life and your behavior and past hurts and traumas and things through a different lens. And then of course that has, top-down effects on the body, so these unresolved traumas and what's called MACEs, major adverse childhood events, correlate with mortality and disease onset and all of this. So it's something that we really need to address. And a non-pharmacologic way to look at to address this, I think, is breath work and yoga. Doing breath work can have like a psychedelic-like effect on your body, on your central nervous system, on your heart rate variability. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to learn more about your personal experience with psychedelics. Could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah. So something really called me to get into mushrooms, and I started growing them in 2016. Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm not sure what exactly it was. I had an abusive family member as a child. So I had a lot of like anger type stuff. And like, for context, like this individual would do some really mean things, like hog tie me and like throw me down the stairs, and like I almost broke my jaw, or like hog tie me and put me in blackberry bushes, and like my family would be eating dinner, I'd be stuck in the bushes, and I had to like get myself out, and would try to control the food that I would eat and all this weird stuff. So I had like a lot of like anger from that, but he was older than me, so I couldn't do anything about it. So like at school, I would just like be the tough guy, like bump into people and get in fights and stuff in high school, and like gravitated towards like playing football and tackling and all of this. And it wasn't until it wasn't until my daughter was born that I was like, I got to get control of this, because I don't want to repeat that as a father, because these, we think about diseases run in families, right? Obesity, but it's because people have been, eating the same foods. Mm-hmm. Well, the same thing happens with traumas. We repeat them, right? So I'm like, I didn't want to repeat that and then be that type of father for my daughter. So becoming a parent really helped. And then I was like, I think I could benefit from psychedelics, and honestly, I can't remember who got me into it, but I was like, I can grow this stuff. I wanted to I went to a ranch because psilocybin can grow on cow patties, cubensis, I think it is. But I was like, I'm not going to find any mushrooms out here. And then in Washington State, there are some mushrooms that randomly grow. And I'm like, I don't know if this is poisonous, because there's lookalike mushrooms. And this guy, Daniel Winkler, I interviewed him for my podcast, and he was like, no purple, no magic, right? So I would like forage for mushrooms, and I would break off a piece of the top of the mushroom and wait for this, because the psilocybin gets converted to psilocybin, or there's some, It's kind of like garlic. You know how garlic can sit there, then you squish it, and the allicin and the allen make this whatever. Mushrooms are similar to that. And I was having no luck finding mushrooms in 2016. My daughter was like 4 at the time. And so I found a way to grow them myself. And then I would just start like just microdosing. I had no idea what I was doing, Shadia. I would just like make some tea, and I would sit there, and I would like close my eyes and like sometimes cry and like go on a hike with my daughter. And like I found myself just connecting with her in a unique way.
Beautiful.
I was like, that's really cool. And then a friend of mine introduced me to LSD, low dose, like 20 micrograms. And it was funny, I remember I was in Toronto, Canada one time, and we were at a coffee shop. It's called Impact Kitchen, actually. A really great place in Toronto, if people know about it. Like a more farm-to-table type place. And we were having a meeting, and he was like, here's some LSD. And I like squeezed it so much. Like I was supposed to do a microdose, but I did a full macrodose. And I had to meet this pharmacy, because I was in sales at the time. And they had some issues with the company that I was representing, and I was like super nervous, because I went outside and I saw the tree, the bark on the tree was alive, and like all the flowers were like 3-dimensional. I'm like, oh my gosh, I had this really important meeting. Like, but it was like the best meeting I've ever had, because I could, right when I walked in the room, like I saw the two people, I'm like, okay, I picked up on the problems right away. And we sat for like 3 hours. We worked through all the challenges. There was shipping issues, there was billing issues, and like I was able to sort it out. And I called my boss on the way home, and he was like, whoa, like that went really well. And I was still like pretty high on the LSD. And he was like, you seem like you're on it, Mike. And I'm like, and I was like, whoa, this has been really enlightening. So yeah, I dabble a couple days a week with LSD, 15 micrograms. You do build up a tolerance to it.
Okay.
But it's, again, everyone's different. Everyone's brain is a little bit different. I believe that LSD works a little bit more on the serotonergic system, serotonin, than other compounds. But I think we're getting, I guess maybe what inspired me is Steve Jobs was really into psychedelics. And as a business owner, I think he's impressive. But the iPhone, the iTunes, all these things that he's created are just remarkable and shifted the entire world. So that was part of maybe what got my initial interest. But personally, I think LSD is amazing. And I think many people would benefit from microdosing this. And then a full blast dose of psilocybin, 3 grams, I think once a year could be really helpful. One of the things that I found to be helpful with my previous partner is when we had issues, which would come up from traumas and stuff, we would do MDMA and psilocybin together. And so that would like drop us down to a point of resonance where we could like pick up and say things in such a way that wasn't triggering to the other person.
Right.
So we could communicate like uncommunicated expectations, like, hey, I would really like it if you did this thing, but under the influence of psychedelics and in pathogens like MDMA, it lands different, right? It comes out of your mouth different and lands different for your partner. So I commonly recommend this for my friends who are having marital issues now. Not that I'm a marital counselor by any means, but sometimes I hear some of the things that my friends tell me about their partnerships, and I'm like, oof, that sounds really rough. And then I'll listen for like 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll be like, okay, have you ever done MDMA or psilocybin with your partner? Like, whoa, ecstasy? And I'm like, look, you have some stuff going on in your marriage, like you guys haven't had sex for like 6 months, like that's not normal, that's not healthy, that's not good for your family. Like I would highly recommend you do this, and I can link you up with someone that can help you, like you can source it. And the people that I've recommended it to who are open to that have reported just significant shifts in their relationship. And then you think about that, if we're not having good relationships at home with our partner, that's going to affect our body and our physiology. Like I've been in a relationship like that where I go home and it's like, I don't even want to go inside because I know like it's going to be a shit show, And that affects your whole physiology.
Absolutely.
That affects your sleep, that affects digestion, that affects your hormones, that affects aging, recovery, all of this. And so I think it is really good for people who are married or partnered to explore this aspect and then help to see your traumas through a different lens. Part of it is like, as I was told by a friend of mine, MDMA can take the prefrontal cortex offline. So you can look down at your amygdala, which is like where your fear, your traumas, your hurts are stored, through a different lens, and be like, you can look at them but not be triggered by them. And be like, oh, like in the case of this family member that was abusive to me, it's like, okay, that happened, it is what it is, but I'm not gonna let that continue to dictate my life. That doesn't benefit me or him or my daughter or my customers if I'm always upset that this thing happened to me when I was like 11 years old. It's like, it happened, it is what it is, but time to move on, I think part of what trauma does is it gets people stuck in this victim loop, and they want attention, they want people to feel sorry for them, everything in their life happens because life is just unfair and it's like, really bad things happen to good people. That's part of life, and we need to move on from that. And psychedelics and even breath work just help you navigate life's challenges through a more stoic lens, because the only thing we have control over is our thoughts. That's it, and then it teaches us to more love like the sun. You can love on someone, but if they're not able to receive that,
Absolutely.
then it's like, that's their thing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't continue to love them, right? And so I think that's where psychedelics really help people.
What about people that might be interested but have had addictive behavior in the past, say recovering alcoholics? What would be a good entry point, or what would you say to them?
That's a good point. I think just being radically honest about using psychedelics not to get high, not to escape. I have a family member who was like, he's an alcoholic, and was like, I'm going to use mushrooms to get off alcohol. It was like chugging 2 beers and then like throwing down a bunch of mushrooms. It's like, dude, this is not it, right? I personally used to drink a lot. Always had to have a glass of wine before, at night. Sometimes I drink a bottle of wine at night. And since using psychedelics, like I haven't had a drink for 3 years. I'm sorry, I'll have like 1 or 2 glasses of wine a year, but I never self-medicate with alcohol because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's not a sustainable thing. So I think for people that do have that addictive aspect to it, psychedelics aren't inherently addicting in that way. In fact, various studies do show that people that use psychedelics are much less likely to engage in illicit drug use and recreational drinking and so forth. So I think that's important for people to understand. So yeah, addiction runs in my family, but just you're not gonna want to always overdo this stuff. We're talking about microdosing periodically, and I think there's a lot of benefit to that. And then a periodic macrodose when you have some stuff you got to work through, because you don't want to carry that around with you, because it's literally going to affect how you show up for your partner, for your child, for your customers, your boss, your business,
for yourself. Absolutely.
All this. I mean, why would we want to hang on to these hurts? Now, some people do want that. Where they are in that space, they want the attention of being a victim, and I'm sure I've been there before as well. So I'm not like, vilifying that mindset. We all got to meet everyone where we are at. But there's a great book that I would implore people to check out. It's called The 15 Laws of Conscious Leadership. And so part of why we are here in life, procreate, to love, and to have meaning and purpose, is to grow. Right? And if we're always having the mindset that bad things happen to me, life just doesn't work out, this person is always, men are always bad to me, or women always cheat on me, or whatever, that's a victim mindset, victimology. And that's not good. We want to learn and grow. If someone does something bad to you, that's an opportunity to learn. So in the future, as Jordan Peterson talks about, these hurts help you avoid the snake pit in the future. So to jump over it or move around the snake pit so you don't get stuck in it. And growth is part of the process. And sometimes in our life journey, we experience bad things, and it's just an opportunity to grow. And so that book, 15 Laws of Conscious Leadership, will help people be like, okay, this bad thing that happened, bankruptcy, divorce, infidelity, it sucks. We've been there. It's hard, but it's an opportunity to learn and grow, right? And to become a better, more resilient person, so that you don't attract that in the future, or you know how to navigate around that the best you can.
What's something you're curious about in this space that you like to explore?
Yeah, good question. what we're talking about now, I think the integration of spirituality and mind-body medicine as it pertains to like basic physiologic functions, like we have rampant metabolic disease. 94% of US adults have some degree of metabolic dysfunction. We have numerous people that need a liver transplant because they have fatty liver. We have childhood obesity. We have autism. We have all these conditions that are spiraling out of control. It's unsustainable. The healthcare system is broken. It's bankrupt. Like this is literally, we are on a crash course for destruction, unfortunately, here in the US and throughout the world as well, sadly. So we need to do something a little bit different, right? And I think it does start with food and all of that, but the traumas and the spiritual side of things needs to be part of that conversation, because people know that they shouldn't drink a six pack of Bud Light at night, but they still do. Why is that, And so how can we get to that person to get them to make the changes? And I think the way to do that could be with the help of spirituality, could be helpful with, psychedelics to motivate people to maybe not need to self-medicate with some of these things. Or when life is stressful, hit up the drive-through. I've worked with several obese people who just have a food addiction. It's like they know they shouldn't go to Dairy Queen on the way home from work and have an 1,800 calorie blizzard, but they just do because they don't believe that they just believe that they're always gonna be the overweight person. They're the overweight kid, overweight teenager, so they're gonna be the overweight adult. So like to get them to realize that doesn't have to be their destiny, It does seem that the conversations now, more and more people are open to psychedelics and spirituality in general, just breath work. I went to a really great breath work session about a week. Actually, I called you, I think we talked sometime that weekend, and I had this amazing release, and all these people in there, like these were not like Audrey Marcus's clique, right? These are just random people, all walks of life. Someone had lost a daughter. Another person was going through a divorce. Someone lost their business. Like we sat around in a circle of about 30 people. A friend of mine, Jeff LeCoven, and his wife, Stephanie, led it. And Shadia, it was amazing. Afterwards, people were crying, saying they saw God. Like just the amount of healing that happened in a 2-hour hyperventilation breathwork session with some holds was amazing. And we sat there and just talked about like what we all experienced. And that was drug-like, So people might be turned off by the fact that I'm like kind of tacitly, endorsing drugs, LSD and psilocybin. But we can get that same effect through breath work or through yoga. That to me is just super exciting. And just the shift and the resonance that has occurred in those people, they're probably that night didn't want to go out and get drunk, or watch porn or whatever. Like they're like, probably like, hey, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to hug my kids or my partner and eat a healthy meal and go to bed, So that all, it's all interconnected,
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Mike, such a pleasure having you.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
Thank you. High Intensity Health is my website and YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.